I'm Lucy Edwards, Director of Strategic Engagement at Matterport. And here I am in Dallas, Texas, with Jay Remley, our Chief Revenue Officer at Matterport. Hi, Jay.
Hi, Lucy. Thank you for the interview and meeting.
Yeah, it's great to be in your neck of the woods.
Thank you for coming down, for sure.
Absolutely. So today we are going to talk about you and the company and the vision. Both of us, we are part of this amazing company, Matterport. Very happy to be here and proud to be a part of the developing new stage of Matterport. So we'll go back to the beginning. As a kid, when you were a child, were you a straight A student? Did you love sports? Did you dream about being a scientist?
Well, you're going way back. Let's see. As a kid, I was not a straight A student. I would say I was an AB student in that 3.6, 3.8 range. As far as a scientist, no. My passion since I was very, very little, like elementary, middle school, was to be a pilot. So being a military pilot was actually my initial goal, or career goal, I should say. So.
And well, how did you end up in a completely different field?
You know, it's interesting. I actually was going through flight school. My undergraduate degree is in aviation, and was going through my flight ratings in flight school. And I had a psychology professor, Professor Jordan. And Professor Jordan asked me towards the end, I was the only senior in the class, back to straight A's. I wanted to make sure I had as much psychology as I could through college and leaving that to my senior year. But he asked me, so what are you going to do when you graduate? And I had about 3 months left to graduate. And I said, well, I'm going to be a pilot. Got all my aviation ratings, private, instrument, multi-engine, commercial. After I graduate, I'm going to be a commercial pilot. And he says, well, what would you want to do that for? And I said, well, I love flying. I've always wanted to be a pilot. And he said, well, it's just kind of like a glorified bus driver, isn't it? And I said, Professor Jordan, no, it's not like a glorified bus driver. It's much more than that. And he says, well, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I'm working for Airborne Express, which Airborne got acquired by DHL. It was, the FedEx, if you will, back in the 90s. And I said, well, I work for Airborne Express. And he says, oh, so you want to be a glorified truck driver? And I said, Professor Jordan, I know you're a psychology professor. I don't know if you're playing with me on this one, but no, it is much more responsibility than, being a glorified truck driver. But I'll take that as a note and appreciate your feedback, but I am going to be a pilot when I graduate. And so anyway, I graduated my undergrad and bachelor's degree in aviation. And I always think back on that conversation, because as you go through life, there's always 3 or 4 or 5 conversations that kind of change the trajectory of your life-changing conversations. And that was definitely one for me.
So you decided not to continue as a glorified bus driver?
No. I was actually working for Airborne Express at the San Jose airport, and they had a supervisor that left. And my manager, Mr. Sherman Foster, asked me saying, hey, Jay, would you like to take over supervising the San Jose operations for Airborne Express? And I was 20 years old at the time, maybe almost 21. And I was like, wow, that's a big responsibility. But I was always someone to say, look, bring it on. If I can have more, if I can take on more, I'll take it. And so I took the opportunity to be the ramp supervisor for Airborne when I was 20 years old, supervising a team of like 10 people. And then a year later, they asked me, not even a year later, about 6 months later, they asked me if I'd be interested in taking over the Oakland ramp operations. So now I was the Bay Area ramp operations supervisor. And I learned then that working with people and building teams, hiring and getting people to work together and understanding what our goals are and how we achieve those goals together, that started to kind of make me think about, man, maybe I don't want to be a pilot, going to the airport every day, jumping in the cockpit, flying for 4 or 5 hours, going to the hotel, going back to the airport the next day. Maybe there's something to this whole...
Something bigger than that.
Bigger around this kind of, leadership started to come into my vocabulary more then. And, taking on a manager role as the Bay Area, ramp manager was, the next opportunity. And so anyway, after college, I started to kind of go down this management track, leadership track with Airborne Express. So that was my divergence a little bit from that passion as a young boy wanting to be a pilot.
So where did you go after that? I'm just trying to get closer and closer to the point that you are Chief Revenue Officer. Well, leadership, I totally get it. You had the vision. Mm-hmm. You were able to apply your vision properly. That brought results.
Right. So Airborne, I worked for Airborne for about 8 years in various roles. They asked me if I was interested in going into industrial engineering, and it was completely outside of my undergrad. And I said, yeah, sure. And that was all about moving. Now that I understood the operations, running the Bay Area operations for Airborne for a couple years, how do I go in and optimize the Bay Area operations? And I did that. And then they asked me, hey, we're opening up a new operation in Minneapolis, another one at JFK, another one in Kansas City. And before I knew it, I was 24 years old and I was flying around optimizing all of these Bay Area operations and operations for Airborne Express outside of the Bay Area as an industrial engineer. And that was all about working with people and understanding what was hard for them, where were they seeing friction, and how could I help overcome that friction to optimize the workflow and the operations. And so I did that for 2 or 3 years, and that really got me into logistics. And then after about 8 years at Airborne, including my time there when I was in college, Hewlett-Packard was looking for someone, and Menlo Logistics, actually, another logistics company who had the contract with HP. And they asked me to come on board and own the HP account for them, which was basically, they did all of Menlo Logistics, or Menlo Worldwide, owned all of the outbound supply chain for HP North America. And so now I had this team of about 80 people.
In your mid-20s?
At that time, I was 28.
Well,
so
still.
28. Mm-hmm. And I was responsible for making sure we optimized the outbound supply chain for all of HP North America. So their PCs, their laptops at the time, printers, what they called supply aftermarket, which was their inkjet and paper and things like that. And it was great. I got to learn a lot about supply chain and operations and logistics and trains, planes, and automobiles and how things get moved around the most efficient way. And I finished my MBA. And when I got out of my MBA school, one of the students I went to MBA school with at Santa Clara University was at a company called Seagate. Mm-hmm. And Seagate's a large hardware storage manufacturer. And they had asked if I would come over. They were going through a big supply chain overhaul and saying, hey, what you're doing with HP, could you come over and help us overhaul our whole supply chain here at Seagate? And so, yeah, that was 2000. So in 2000, I left Menlo Worldwide, went over to Seagate to run their worldwide supply chain and sales operations. And so anyway, I did that for a few years, and understanding how supply chain, implementing systems, technology, processes, running worldwide sales ops there.
And still make money.
And still make money. And I'll tell you, it takes you got to sell a lot of hard drives to make a little bit of money. But Seagate was about $10 or $11 billion business. And they had spun off, Veritas and spun off Seagate Software, and we're really back to the hardware business. And so in 2005, they asked me if I would leave my supply chain and sales ops role and go build this new storage as a service business. Back then it was SaaS, or now it's cloud, but back then it was just SaaS. And they said, hey Jay, would you go off and let's figure out what Seagate and how Seagate and where Seagate should diversify outside of the hardware business, because I had never done hardware in my career. And so I said, yeah, sure. In the spirit of always wanting to learn something and learn more and push myself, I was like, man, I have never kind of started a company before inside of a company. Let's go see what this is all about. And so I did do that. I left and I asked them, I said, well, if this whole storage as a service business doesn't work out, can I have my old supply chain and sales ops job back? And they said, well, we can't save the role for you. We got to backfill your role, but don't worry about that. We'll figure that out, later on, or if it comes to that point. And, I thought about it, and it was one of the first opportunities in my career where I was like, wow, this is kind of a real risk if I take on this role. And 6 months down the road, they decide not to go after this storage as a service business or whatnot, what will happen? But in the spirit of trying to go do bigger things and always challenging myself, anyway, I took it on. So yeah, that was my first kind of role, if you will, where I had complete control of revenue and P&L and building a team and leading sales and marketing and engineering and customer support, customer success. Like it was a big jump for me. But I will say there was an individual named Brian Dexheimer, and Brian gave me that opportunity. He saw, I think, in me, like everybody has to see in other folks a talent or an ability, and to challenge them and stretch them to do things they probably wouldn't do on their own, which is to me a sign of a true leader, pushing people to places that they wouldn't be able to get to or want to get to or ever get to maybe on their own without somebody pushing them. Brian pushed me into this role to go lead this Seagate Services division and build it. So yeah, I did that. We built it out to about 80 million in revenue and did 4 acquisitions, and it was an amazing opportunity, for me that, Brian and Seagate gave me at the time. And at that point, that was like my first kind of real revenue role of having to go to the CFO and tell him, hey, I need more investment dollars, or we're missing our expenses by X, or we're missing top line by Y, or exceeding. I want more, funding to grow the top line, whatever the case may be, being that first, role where if things don't go well, the buck stops with me. So from there, yeah, I went on to do at that point in my career, I was always more customer facing, revenue generating, after that. So the time I left Seagate.
That's a fascinating story. I love it. I just absolutely love it. Yeah, and very adventurous. It's very entrepreneurial of you to take a risk, to take it to another level, to try something different. And when did you join Matterport?
So I joined Matterport in July of 2019.
Oh, okay. Well, right before COVID.
Just before COVID. Yeah, it was, 9 months maybe before COVID, yeah.
Yeah.